There was once a wandering tribe who crossed a land that maps refused to name. It was not just dry, it was merciless. Wind carved the earth into sharp ridges. The sun pressed down like judgment, and every direction looked exactly the same. Among them was a young woman named Shira. She had left behind a land of chains. But freedom, she quickly learned, does not silence hunger. On the third week of their journey, food began to disappear. What little grain they carried turned to dust in their hands. Waterskins grew light. Whispers grew heavy. Did we escape only to die here? Shira heard the complaints every night. She felt them, too. One evening, she climbed a ridge alone and stared at the horizon. God of our fathers, she whispered, you opened the sea. Will you now close your hand? Silence answered. But in the early gray of dawn, something strange happened. A thin layer covered the ground. It shimmered like frost. The children noticed it first. They bent down, touched it, tasted it. It's sweet, one shouted. Soon the whole camp stirred. What was it? No one had seen anything like it. They gathered it in their hands. Soft, flaky, like coriander seed, pale as pearl. Shira tasted it carefully. It was warm in her mouth, almost like bread brushed with honey. Not wild roots, not desert bark, but something deliberate. They asked their leaders, what is it? And the only answer was a question. What is it? That is how it received its name, not from understanding, but from wonder. That morning, everyone ate. For the first time in days, fear loosened its grip. But before the sun rose high, a voice passed through the camp. Gather only what you need for today. Do not store it for tomorrow. Shira frowned. That made no sense. In a desert, you survive by storing. You prepare for disaster. You protect yourself. Still, she gathered only enough for herself and her younger brother. By noon, the sun burned fiercely. The white flakes melted away, as if they had never existed. The next morning, it happened again. The same shimmering layer, the same sweetness, the same instruction, only for today. By the fourth day, some people panicked. They rose early, gathered double, and hid it inside their tents. Shira heard the whispers of secret plans. It won't last forever, they said. We must secure ourselves. That night, a foul odor spread through the camp. Rot, worms. The stored flakes decayed in darkness. Shira stepped outside her tent, holding her nose. Fear had spoiled the miracle. The next morning, the white covered the ground again. Fresh, untouched by yesterday's decay. Shira felt something stir inside her heart. This was not just food. This was training. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Every sunrise brought the same quiet gift. Every sunset closed the lesson. Shira began to notice something deeper. On mornings when she woke early and gathered calmly, her heart felt steady. On mornings when she rushed in anxiety, her hands trembled. The white flakes had become a mirror, revealing who trusted, revealing who feared. One evening, as they rested, beneath a sky thick with stars, her younger brother asked, "Why doesn't it fall at night?" Shira thought for a long moment. "Because we are meant to wake up expecting it," she said softly. Years passed. The tribe grew accustomed to the pattern. 6 days of gathering. On the 6th, double portion. On the 7th, none. Yet the 6th day's portion never rotted, as if rest itself preserved it. And slowly, without realizing it, the tribe changed. They stopped obsessing over tomorrow. They began rising with quiet confidence. The desert was still harsh. Sand still cut against their skin. But panic had lost its throne. One afternoon, as they approached the edge of a new land, green began to appear. Actual grass, clusters of fruit trees, streams flowing freely. It felt unreal. The next morning, Shira stepped outside her tent out of habit. She looked down, bare ground, no white layer. Her heart skipped. Had the miracle ended? For a moment, fear tried to return, but then she heard laughter, children running through fields, men and women harvesting grapes. The land itself was feeding them now, and suddenly she understood. The morning white was never permanent. It was preparation. It had sustained them when they could not sustain themselves. It had taught them daily trust before they received lasting abundance. It had broken the slave mindset that clings to storage and taught the heart to lean. Shira knelt and pressed her hand into the soil. The desert had not been a punishment. It had been a classroom. The white flakes were not just food. They were proof. Proof that heaven sees hunger. Proof that provision can appear without warning. Proof that dependence is not weakness. And here's the heart of this parable. Sometimes God does not give you a lifetime supply. He gives you sunrise. Sometimes he does not explain the wilderness. He simply covers it with enough strength for today, enough grace for today, enough peace for today. If he gave you everything at once, you might forget him. If he gave you nothing, you would despair. So he gives you daily, just enough to keep you walking, just enough to keep you trusting. And perhaps the greatest miracle was not the white on the ground. It was the quiet transformation in their hearts. They entered the wilderness as survivors of bondage. They entered the promise as people who had learned dependence. If you find yourself in a desert season, listen closely. Look for the morning white. It may not shimmer on sand. It may look like unexpected strength. It may look like provision arriving at the last moment. It may look like peace that makes no logical sense. Do not try to store tomorrow's grace. It will rot into anxiety. Wake early, gather today's portion, and walk. Because the God who fed wanderers with dew still sustains his children now. And when your season shifts, and it will, you will look back and realize the daily miracle was shaping you for the greater harvest. That is the parable of Manna, and its lesson still falls fresh every morning. There was a morning when the ground was covered in something no one had ever seen before. It looked like frost. It felt like flakes. It melted with the sun. And if you didn't gather it fast enough, it disappeared. Imagine waking up tomorrow and your entire survival depended on something that would vanish by noon. No savings account, no grocery store, no backup plan, just trust. Would you panic or would you believe? Because here's the shocking truth. The desert wasn't just a place on a map, it was a test, a proving ground, a divine laboratory where heaven revealed something most people today still don't understand. And listen carefully. What happened in that wilderness thousands of years ago is happening again, right now, in your life. You may not see flakes on your driveway, but manna is still falling. The question is, are you noticing it before it melts? Stay with me. Because by the end of the story, you're going to realize something that might completely change the way you look at your struggles, your finances, your anxiety, even your unanswered prayers. And I'm serious. This isn't just a Bible story. This is your story. Close your eyes for a moment. Feel the heat pressing against your skin, sand stretching endlessly in every direction. No trees, no rivers, no supermarkets. Just millions of weary footsteps carving a path through uncertainty. The people had just witnessed miracles. The Red Sea parted. Pharaoh's army defeated. Freedom tasted sweet. But freedom doesn't feel glorious when your stomach is empty. 3 days into the desert, and the celebration turned into complaints. Have you ever noticed how quickly praise turns into panic? One moment you're thanking God for what he delivered you from. The next, you're doubting him because of where he's leading you. That's human nature. And the Israelites were no different. They grumbled against Moses. They said it would have been better to die in Egypt with full stomachs than wander free and hungry. That statement alone reveals something uncomfortable. Sometimes we prefer familiar bondage over uncertain faith. Let that sink in. Then something happened. In Exodus chapter 16, the impossible occurred. When the dew lifted, thin flakes like frost covered the ground. The people looked at it and said, "What is it?" In Hebrew, that question is literally man-hu, which became manna. The miracle was so unfamiliar, they named it after their confusion. Think about that. God provided. And they responded with a question mark. And here's the first shocking reality. God's provision often shows up in forms we don't recognize. We pray for abundance. He sends daily bread. We pray for clarity. He gives one step. We pray for lifetime guarantees. He provides sunrise instructions. Manna couldn't be stored overnight. If they hoarded it, it rotted. Except on the 6th day. When they gathered double for the Sabbath, then somehow it didn't spoil. Science struggles to explain it. Some skeptics argue it may have been resin secretions from desert insects. But listen, resin doesn't appear 6 days a week for 40 years. Resin doesn't rot on command. Resin doesn't obey Sabbath timing. For 40 years, in one of the harshest environments on Earth, millions survived without farming, hunting, or commerce. Statistically, logistically, impossible. Spiritually, intentional. God wasn't just feeding stomachs. He was training hearts. He was dismantling a slave mentality. Slaves store out of fear. Children trust their father. And that, right there, is where this story becomes modern. Because today's desert doesn't always look like sand. Sometimes it looks like a hospital waiting room. Sometimes it looks like unemployment. Sometimes it looks like scrolling social media at midnight, wondering why everyone else seems blessed. And here's the part nobody talks about. We live in the most resource-rich generation in history. Yet anxiety is at record highs. Why? Because we have stockpiles, but we've lost daily dependence. We want security without surrender. But manna only fell where obedience walked. Every morning they had to go out and gather it. If they stayed in their tents, they starved. Provision required participation. That's your modern desert lesson number 1. God provides, but you still step outside. There's a man named Daniel, not the prophet, just an ordinary man from Texas. Lost his job during an economic downturn. 3 kids, mortgage, no backup savings. The interviews kept falling through. One night he sat in his car and prayed, "God, I need manna." The next morning he received a call for a short-term contract job. Not glamorous, not permanent, but enough to cover the month. Then another opportunity came, then another. 2 years later, he realized something profound. There was never a day they went without what they needed. Not extra, not abundance, but enough. And when he looked back, he said something powerful. If I had received the long-term job immediately, I would have missed seeing God show up daily. Listen, sometimes the miracle isn't multiplication. Sometimes the miracle is maintenance. And that's harder for our pride, because maintenance forces humility. In Deuteronomy 8, Moses later explained why God allowed the hunger before the manna, to humble them, to test them, to teach them that man does not live by bread alone. That verse was later quoted by Jesus in the wilderness. Isn't that interesting? Thousands of years later, another desert, another hunger, another test. And the enemy says, "Turn these stones into bread." But Jesus refused, because he understood something Israel had to learn. Physical hunger isn't the greatest danger. Spiritual independence is. Here's a theoretical question for you. What if the reason your desert feels dry is because God is detoxing you from self-sufficiency? What if the scarcity isn't punishment, but preparation? Because think about this. Manna fell before they reached the Promised Land. In the Promised Land, they would farm, they would harvest, they would build. But in the wilderness, they had to learn trust first. We want the harvest stage without the dependency stage, but dependency builds intimacy, and intimacy builds identity. There's something else astonishing about manna. It stopped the day after they ate produce from Canaan. The miracle ceased when the season shifted. Here's the shocking part. If they had grown addicted to the miracle, they would have resented the maturity, because miracles are spectacular. But maturity is sustainable. Maybe God isn't withholding from you. Maybe he's transitioning you. Listen closely. Manna tasted like wafers made with honey, sweetness in the desert, not just calories, kindness. Even in correction, God added sweetness, which tells me something about modern deserts. If everything tastes bitter, we might be gathering the wrong things, because manna had to be collected early, before the sun grew hot. There's a timing principle hidden here. Daily dependence works best in early moments, before distractions, before noise, before heat. When Jesus taught his disciples to pray, he said, "Give us this day our daily bread," daily. Not monthly, not yearly, daily. Imagine if we approached faith like that. Not binge-consuming sermons once a week, but gathering small faith portions every morning. What would change? Here's something that might shock you. The average American checks their phone over 90 times a day. But how many times do we pause to gather spiritual nourishment? We scroll, but we don't collect. We consume content, but we don't cultivate trust. And slowly, without realizing it, we starve while surrounded by noise. The Israelites had one job each morning: walk out, bend down, gather, trust tomorrow to God. And I know what you're thinking. That sounds beautiful, but what about real-world pressures? Bills don't disappear with devotion. Illness doesn't vanish with meditation. True, but manna didn't eliminate the desert either. It sustained them through it. That's the difference. God's provision doesn't always remove the environment. It strengthens you inside it. And here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Not everyone trusted the process. Some tried to hoard extra overnight. It rotted. Worms crawled through it. The very thing meant to sustain them became disgusting when stored in fear. Let that image stay with you. Blessings rot when controlled. Peace decays when manipulated. Faith weakens when micromanaged. If you're constantly anxious about tomorrow, you're carrying spoiled manna. And I'm not saying don't plan, but there's a difference between wisdom and worry. One is stewardship. The other is fear disguised as responsibility. And listen, I've seen this in my own life. Moments when I tried to calculate outcomes instead of surrender them. And every time I clutched tighter, anxiety grew louder. But when I released, provision surprised me. Not always dramatically, but consistently. That's the real miracle of manna. Consistency. For 40 years. Over 14,000 mornings. Imagine waking up every single day to find proof that heaven hadn't forgotten you. What would that do to your fear? What would that do to your identity? Because here's the deeper revelation. Manna wasn't just food. It was evidence. Evidence that even in discipline, God was near. Evidence that wilderness is not abandonment. Evidence that delay is not denial. And I need you to hear this clearly. Your desert does not disqualify you. It defines you. It shapes endurance. It clarifies values. It exposes idols. It reveals where your real trust lives. There's an old Jewish tradition that says manna tasted like whatever the eater desired. Imagine that. God tailoring provision personally. Could it be that the reason we miss modern manna is because we expect it to look identical for everyone? Comparison kills gratitude. But manna was personal. And here's something fascinating. God instructed Moses to place a jar of manna inside the Ark of the Covenant. Why preserve it? Because future generations would live in houses they didn't build and eat crops they didn't plant. Comfort makes memory fade. So God preserved a reminder. You survived before. You'll survive again. Maybe you need your own jar, a journal, a list of past provisions. Moments you thought it was over, and it wasn't. Because the enemy's greatest weapon isn't attack. It's amnesia. If he can make you forget yesterday's manna, you'll panic about tomorrow's desert. But remembrance fuels resilience. And here's the truth I promised to reveal at the end. Manna was temporary. It prepared them for something greater. In John chapter 6, Jesus said something radical. I am the bread of life. He was declaring that manna was never the final miracle. It was a preview. The real sustenance wasn't flakes on sand. It was a relationship, which means modern manna isn't money. It isn't opportunity. It isn't even physical health. It's presence. God sustaining you through himself. And that's why you can walk through the deserts today without collapsing. Because the same God who fed millions with morning dew now dwells within believers. Let that overwhelm you for a moment. The wilderness was external then. Now the kingdom is internal. And maybe, just maybe, your life isn't lacking provision. Maybe you're overlooking it because it doesn't glitter. Sometimes manna looks like strength to endure one more day. Sometimes it looks like unexpected peace during chaos. Sometimes it looks like a friend who calls at the right moment. Sometimes it looks like breath in your lungs this morning. If you woke up today, manna fell. You just have to gather it. So here's my question for you. What if tomorrow morning you woke up not scanning for problems, but searching for provision? What if instead of asking, what is it, in confusion, you whispered, thank you, in recognition? Listen, deserts end, but lessons remain. Israel eventually crossed into promise, and the daily flakes ceased, but the trust they learned sustained generations. And I believe someone watching right now is in a desert season. You feel exposed, uncertain, maybe even forgotten. But here's the shocking truth. The very place that feels empty may be where you encounter God most clearly, because distractions fade in deserts. And dependency sharpens vision. So don't curse the wilderness too quickly. It might be feeding you in ways comfort never could. And as this story closes, I want you to imagine something. Tomorrow morning, before checking your phone, before replaying yesterday's stress, pause, whisper, give me today's manna. Then watch. Watch for provision in unexpected forms. Watch for peace that doesn't make sense. Watch for strength you didn't manufacture, because manna still falls, quietly, daily, faithfully. And if this story stirred something inside you, if it reminded you that you are not alone in your desert, then help us spread this message of hope. Like this video so more people wandering through wilderness seasons can find encouragement. Share it with someone who feels exhausted, and subscribe to Parables of Hope. Your support truly matters. Every view, every comment, every share. It helps this message travel further. And listen, we can't keep creating stories like this without you. Your response motivates us more than you know. Go watch our previous videos on Parables of Hope and let these truths strengthen your journey. Together, we can remind a hurting world that God still provides. The deserts are not destiny. The manna still falls. And here's the final thought I want to leave you with. If God sustained millions for 40 years in a literal wilderness, what makes you think he can't sustain you through this season? You are not forgotten. You are being formed. And tomorrow morning, when the sun rises, look closely, because heaven may have already placed today's miracle at your feet. All you have to do is gather it. And now, before the story truly ends, lean in for a moment. Imagine Shira in her final years. Her hair silver, her hands weathered by both desert wind and harvest grain. She sits outside her home at dawn, the same hour she once stepped out to gather white flakes from the sand. But this time, there is no desert. There are vineyards, fields, children laughing in the distance. And yet, she still wakes before sunrise, not because she expects manna to fall, but because she remembers. Her granddaughter sits beside her one morning and asks quietly, "Grandmother, do you ever miss the wilderness?" The question lingers in the air. Miss the hunger? Miss the uncertainty? Miss the endless sand? Shira closes her eyes. And to everyone's surprise, a tear slides down her cheek. "Yes," she whispers. Not because the desert was easier, but because that was where she learned who God truly was. "In the wilderness," she says slowly, "we had nothing but him. In the wilderness, we woke up not knowing how we would survive, and by noon we knew we were carried. In the wilderness, we learned that fear spoils, but trust feeds." Her granddaughter leans closer. "Were you ever truly afraid?" Shira smiles gently. "Every day. But every morning, the ground answered my fear. Listen carefully. There is something sacred about seasons where you have no choice but to rely on God. Because those are the seasons when you discover he was closer than you ever imagined." And here is the emotional truth hidden beneath the parable. One day, your desert will end. The job will come. The healing will arrive. The breakthrough will appear. The harvest will grow. And when it does, you may look back and realize something unexpected. The most intimate moments you had with God were not in abundance. They were in dependence. You may discover that the mornings when you whispered desperate prayers were the mornings heaven felt nearest. That the nights you thought you wouldn't survive were the nights your soul grew strongest. And maybe, just maybe, you will thank God not only for the harvest, but for the manna, because manna proved something eternal. You are seen, you are sustained, you are not forgotten in the wilderness. And if you are listening right now, feeling like you are standing in sand with no clear future, hear this gently. If you are still breathing, manna is still falling. It may not look like a miracle. It may not feel dramatic. But the strength that kept you here today is not an accident. The peace that didn't make sense last night was not your imagination. The fact that you have survived every day up to this point is evidence He has carried you this far, and he does not begin what he does not intend to finish. So tomorrow morning, when fear tries to speak first, pause. Before the noise, before the rush, before the doubts, and simply say, thank you for today's portion, because you were never meant to carry tomorrow. You were only meant to trust today. And when the sun finally rises on your promised land, you will realize that every fragile, uncertain daily miracle was shaping you for it. That is the heart of manna, not just bread from heaven, but love delivered daily. And that love still falls fresh every morning. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that you are not alone in your wilderness, then listen, this is your moment, right now, before you scroll away, before the noise of the day rushes back in. Take one small step. Subscribe to Parables of Hope, because this channel isn't just about stories. It's about strength for the weary, faith for the uncertain, light for the desert seasons of life. Every video is created to remind you that God still speaks, still provides, still walks beside you. And your subscription does more than grow a channel. It helps these messages reach someone who may be standing at the edge of despair, someone who needs to hear that manna still falls. When you subscribe, you're not just supporting content. You're helping spread hope across homes, across cities, across nations. So be part of this mission. Like the video, if it moved you, share it with someone who needs encouragement. And subscribe to Parables of Hope so you never miss the next story that could strengthen your faith. Your support truly matters. Your response motivates us more than you know. Together we can make sure truth travels farther than fear. And remember, tomorrow morning when the sun rises, mercy will be new, hope will be waiting, and you will not walk alone.